Welcome everybody to my list of carefully curated upcoming strategy games that will hit our shelves allegedly in 2023. In this video, I'll break down each one, updating you with some new gameplay or screenshots or whatever where we have it, and crucially, talk about what the game offers and when we can expect it in our grubby little hands. There'll be some unexpected surprises along the way, so let's jump straight in. First and foremost, we're taking a look at Falling Frontier, a space RTS, and if you've been a regular viewer of the channel or indeed not living under a rock, you may be well aware that Falling Frontier has been on our radar for quite some time. Developed by Stutterfox Studios and published by Hooded Horse, Falling Frontier is a grand strategy simulation game. Obviously, it's set in a sci-fi setting that goes without need for explanation. The campaign is essentially set roughly 200 years and beyond in the future, where a cold war between Mars and Titan is set to go red hot. Something that you might have noted about Falling Frontier, even just from that quick introduction, is its sound design. Some of potentially the best, at least from what we've seen so far. But its sound design is not the only thing that has me a little bit excited about Falling Frontier. As a big fan of Stellaris and vast, procedurally generated games, this one ticks both of those boxes. Moreover, though, there's a little bit more nuance to Falling Frontier than you might expect. Combat itself is claimed to be delved in deep and intuitive mechanics, and by that what they mean is little and big things. For example, shots that you fire from one of your ships can hit unintended targets after missing or ricocheting, adding a little bit more livability and realism to the world. And of course, as you can see from the ships moving around on your screen, the way that you control the map or move through is, or at least seems to be, quite realistic to the game. It also boasts a pretty incredible design mechanic behind the ships, with over 20 different types, from fan favorites like frigates and destroyers through cruisers and battleships, and then it has a crew layer to it as well, where human involvement plays a fairly important part too. Now, as I mentioned at the start, Falling Frontier has been on previous videos like this of mine, subject to what seemed to be a few delays. However, at the moment, both the publisher and developer are of course stating that the game will release this year in 2023, and unfortunately that is all the information that we have about this wonderful little space game that I expect to be a real hit as soon as it hits our shelves. Next up, and definitely hitting our shelves very soon, is Age of Wonders 4. A fantasy strategy game, and of course not the first in a rich legacy that comes from Paradox Studios and Triumph, developed by. Age of Wonders 4 is an interesting blend between 4X strategy and turn-based combat. One of the things that Age of Wonders 4 delivers in a much greater detail than its predecessors is its faction creation and how those factions live in the world. The story setting is fairly straightforward. You rule a fantasy realm where sort of magical rulers have returned to extract their revenge on the world. Inside of that realm, it is of course a turn-based game, and a 4X strategy one too. So you've got all of those things like exploring new territories, founding your cities, and so on. Where it evolves beyond that is potentially in its story-driven elements, and from some of the streams that we've seen from the devs, I'll show you some clips of those in just a second, we've seen different story elements, not just based on the world, but also based on the characters within it. Because most armies, or at least most capable armies, are also led by these key hero characters. Characters that will explore the world, gain loot that you can upgrade and equip to them, but also, of course, tied into the story. The real thing that tops this off, the real cherry on the top for me here, is that the factions that we create, as you can see, quite detailed, can then live on in future playthroughs. So if you choose to play through your newly created magical unicorn faction as the worst possible thing you could ever be, you might just find in a future playthrough that you're playing against that faction. What I really like about this is it helps us as players build a more interactive world, because who wouldn't be more engaged facing an enemy that isn't just a faceless NPC, but is actually a faction that you worked hard to build and create yourself. Age of Wonders 4 releases 2nd of May. Next up, Minecraft Legends, the action strategy game. Now, hear me out. I know what you're thinking. Why did Minecraft make this list, dude? Okay. Minecraft Legends is a combination of course, the existing Minecraft world with a strategy layer over top. It's a fantasy game, it's a tactical game, but how does it actually play? So far, they've been fairly light on the gameplay itself, but what we do know is that with friends or by ourselves, we'll be in charge of leading battles to fight against almost a sort of base building, slightly tower defensey style, of course, in a first person and action setting. Essentially, this is Minecraft as a strategy game. A strategy game where we're tasked with challenging our friends or NPCs to defeat units and settlements, to gain more resources and equipment, and continue that wonderful campaign. Minecraft Legends is set to release on the 18th of April 2023, so it's one of the first titles on my list to release, and given that it's taking the existing Minecraft IP and adding a layer of strategy on top, I'm fairly optimistic that firstly, it'll be a solid experience, and secondly, that it might be able to bring and draw a whole load of new strategy gamers into the market. Next up on my list is Manor Lords, the strategy city builder come RTS game that had many people excited last year when, during the Steam Next Fest, it dropped a demo. However, it was only a demo of the city building elements to Manor Lords, and despite that, it was incredibly fun and incredibly successful, the most played and most downloaded demo of that festival. Manor Lords is more than just a medieval city builder though, although as you can see here, it does that in quite great depth and detail. Manor Lords has two other layers to it as well. The first is a political layer, where inside of your territory and region you may be managing a city, but guess what? There's more where that came from. Perhaps you could trade with them, perhaps you could engage with them politically, or maybe you're gonna go all out for a hostile takeover. This is the element that takes it from just being a city builder and expanding it out to being more of a political strategy game, where other players and realms definitely factor into the decisions that you'll be making. Outside of that, Manor Lords has of course a third and final key component, and that is its combat layer. This is the layer that we know the least about, it's the layer that we've potentially experienced the least too. What we have seen from various trailers and information released from the devs is that it will essentially follow kind of like a Total War style. If you're familiar with that franchise, how could you not be, combat system? We will have a variety of different units standing in armies, and we'll be able to direct them across the terrain to fight with one another. Depending on how you've built your city and how you've equipped those units, of course, will greatly impact your chances of success. The game, I believe, will also have mercenaries and a few other things around the combat system to keep it a little bit more fresh and add a little bit more depth along the way. The combat system will, of course, be the crown on top of this system, this sort of map level, realm level overview, if you will, and of course enable us to not just use politics as a way to take down our foes, but also our armies. Manor Lords is therefore kind of a 3-in-1 strategy game. But even if it was just a city builder, and I mean this quite genuinely, I would be incredibly keen still to play it and to buy it. And now, if we introduce these armies that you can see on screen, that are of course trained inside of our cities, interlacing all three connections of the game together, I think Manor Lords is set to be an incredible experience. It was initially developed in a similar story to Minecraft by but one man, who has now since expanded out, got a little bit of help with different elements of the game, and, like other entries on our list, including Falling Frontier, Manor Lords is being published by Hooded Horse. A quick note, of course, Hooded Horse have a variety of other strategy games that I won't be covering in this video. I've chosen not to cover games that are already out in early access, but you could look to something like Terra Invicta as another example of games that they've been publishing. Manor Lords is at the moment set to release in 2023. It is another game that we've heard about for a while now, it's been on our radar for years, and we don't have any more specific details about when it will be dropping. But personally, I'm happy for them to take a bit longer if it means the experience will be delivered to its fullest. Next up on my list, a shorty but a goodie, a little bit like me, it's Frostpunk 2, a dystopian survival city builder. Frostpunk 2 follows on from a fairly successful Frostpunk 1, of course, and by the way, if you're interested in picking that up, it's very easy to grab it on Steam for a few dollars during any kind of Steam sale, and I would highly recommend it. Frostpunk, as I mentioned in the introduction's key separation from other elements on this list is the fact that it is a dystopian future. It's also got more of a survival element to it than anything else. Picture that hardcore city builder that's less about designing pretty hedges and gardens to go around your metropolis, but instead it's about how are you gonna survive the long, dark, cold. We don't yet have a lot of gameplay or screenshots to go on for Frostpunk 2, so I'll leave this relatively short section here and move on to the next game. Next up on our list, it's Ara History Untold, a 4X historical strategy game, obviously probably my favourite subgenre within the strategy setting. Published by Xbox, it was announced a few months ago now and has since gone through a few technical alphas. Unfortunately, these have been closed alphas, so I can't share any of my gameplay or experiences that I may have picked up from playing them. It boasts a game similar to the likes of Civilization or Humankind, a classic 4X experience. Their difference is that they're claiming it's more about our journey, less about that core, say, historical realism of representing every leader in great historical detail, and more about us as players with extra flexibility to explore and expand. I am less optimistic about Ara History Untold than some of the other entries on this list, but unfortunately, I'll have to leave that there. Next up, my slightly indie pick is For the King 2, an adventure strategy RPG that plays a little bit like a board game at times as well. For the King 1 was pretty well received, and For the King 2 takes that to a next level. Here we can play the game alone or with a party of up to 4 players. It's a turn-based roguelike tabletop game, if you will, and when you jump into the combat system, that's where the real turn-based elements start to play out. Throughout the game, we're tasked to explore and unravel the Queen's terrible secret, but in terms of the gameplay mechanics itself, it's about exploring procedurally generated maps, quests, and events. As you move through with your party, of course, in this roguelike game, you'll eventually pick up better gear or skills to equip your party and move through and face even greater challenges. The game is currently, of course, in development and is set to release in 2023. We, like some other entries in this list, don't quite know exactly when that will be. However, For the King 2, developed by Iron Oak Games and published by Curve Games, should be a really enjoyable, fluid, well-performing game, and that was one of the things that I liked the most about the initial For the King. Let's move on to the next entry on my list, and here we have Stormgate, the only free-to-play entry on the list. And of course, Stormgate is an RTS that hit the news big time when it was announced last year. Currently, Stormgate, unlike other games on this list, in fact, unlike every other game on this list, is listed as releasing coming soon, rather than 2023. Of course, we could read between the lines and say that years away isn't soon, and I truly believe that we will see it hit our shelves this year. Stormgate will be a free-to-play, real-time strategy game where you will send your units and armies in to fight between humanity and alien invaders. You can choose to take on the campaign alone, cooperatively. It will have casual and competitive modes, and of course we should expect this because need not remind you that Frost Giant Studios, the team behind this game, include former developers from the likes of Warcraft 3 and crucially StarCraft 2. And if you're a fan of real-time strategy games like StarCraft, you'll likely be very much looking forward to Stormgate. It's being developed inside of Unreal Engine 5, and from some of the screenshots, which we should take a look at now because the trailer really doesn't give us anything to go off, I think you can see that play out. Of course, it has its sights set on RTS competitive games. World-class esport title is, I imagine, what it wants to be, with competitive 1v1 ladders right the way up through co-op. And finally, I should note, that the developers have called it a free-to-play but never pay-to-win title. Quote, Stormgate is free to play so that everyone can enjoy the fun of RTS. Support the development of additional optional content that you enjoy without ever paying to remove nuances or gain an advantage. They also claim it to be the first truly social RTS with open-ended co-op modes of up to 3 players and of course those competitive modes. I'm looking forward to seeing how that one plays out. Next up, and finally on my list, it's City Skylines II. The epic simulation city builder game that was City Skylines 1 now has a successor some 8 years later. I made a video on City Skylines, a review 6 years ago or something. Don't go back and watch it because I'm sure it's terrible. The reason why I bring that up is because City Skylines has long been one of my favorite simulation titles, and I think for good reason. It really took that legacy of SimCity that EA had developed, and Paradox and Colossal Order said, you know what, we can do this better, we can do this more successfully and in a modern way, and in my opinion, they pulled off all 3 of those things. City Skylines 1 has a massive community behind it, and of course it's received lots of update and content from the developers too. The modding scene, though, could arguably even be more impressive. And so with City Skylines on the horizon, promising us, of course, lots of new upgrades, hopefully a more beautiful experience, and maybe one slightly less congested. or maybe not, because that's kind of the name of the game. City Skylines 2 should deliver, and of course, like everything else on this list, it is allegedly delivering this year, though I would make a quick note that, like a previous entry, at the moment on its Steam page, it is listed as coming soon. So, keep your eyes peeled here, there, and everywhere. I'll be sure to cover a lot of these titles, although probably not all of them, later on this year as they start to come out and we hear more information about them. Thanks so much for tuning in today for some of my top picks for the best upcoming strategy games for 2023. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, do the likes and the subscribes or whatever you feel like doing, and have a good one.